Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. 2 weeks back, an event happened in New York, which would have got a lot more attention had it not been, of course, for the final phase of the US presidential election campaign and the ubiquitous upsurge in COVID-19 infections. A small country in Latin America, Honduras, deposited its instrument of ratification with the United Nations, becoming thereby the 50th country to sign up to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This means that within the short span of 3 years, this treaty to ban the possession, let alone the use of nuclear weapons, has now become a formal UN treaty and comes into force. This said, this treaty for the time being is not going to have much material impact, even if it will have a certain moral impact in terms of further delegitimizing the possession and use of nuclear weapons. Unsurprisingly, the nuclear powers have rejected the treaty. And in doing so, they've made the three traditional arguments that they usually make when it comes to a ban on nuclear weapons. Number one, they argue that nuclear deterrence has succeeded very well in preventing war among the great powers over the last 75 years, nuclear weapons having been used only on 2 occasions against Hiroshima, of course, and Nagasaki. Secondly, they have pointed out that if they gave up their nuclear weapons unilaterally by signing up to the treaty, other nuclear powers would not do so. And this would therefore undermine their security. And they've pointed to the fact that notwithstanding this treaty, countries like Russia and China have been stepping up the pace of their nuclear modernization programs, developing new technologies along the way. North Korea has rolled out recently a new intercontinental ballistic missile at its military parade, and Iran has gone back to resuming processing of nuclear fuel and reopened its Natanz testing facility. So they will only go ahead if others are prepared to go ahead too. And thirdly, they have pointed out that the traditional approach via the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1970, which commits them to give up their nuclear weapons, but in a stage-by-stage process, not linked to any specific timetable, is the more pragmatic, less naive, more realistic way to go. As we've seen over the years in treaties between the Soviet Union and the United States, or Russia and the United States, like the SALT treaties or the START treaties. But that said, if the nuclear powers do not want yet to sign up to a treaty to prohibit the possession or the use of nuclear weapons, what is alarming for the international community is that over the last 4 years, we have not gone towards new kinds of restraints, but away from those restraints. For example, over the last 4 years of the Trump administration, the United States has broken out of the nuclear agreement with Iran, which was not perfect, but at least constrained Iran's ability to move closer to a nuclear weapon through acquiring more of fuel-grade material, and would have at least lasted for 15 years. The United States has also pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which banned intermediate-range missiles worldwide. The United States has dragged its feet in terms of extending for 5 years the START treaty between itself and Russia, which constrains strategic nuclear warheads. And although the United States has made some valiant efforts to engage North Korea in giving up its nuclear weapons, this has not produced any success. So President Trump finishes his 4-year term. For the first 4 years or the second, we'll wait and see what happens tomorrow. But with nuclear weapons becoming more important in international security, and more countries are trying to acquire them. So although the nuclear powers may not like the Prohibition Treaty, they have to show that they can offer a better way forward in this respect by reducing the salience of nuclear weapons and the risk that any future conflict would have a nuclear component. How can they do this? Well, if President Trump wins tomorrow, we're probably going to have, unfortunately, more of the same, because he's committed the United States to a very expensive 1.2 trillion nuclear weapons program. If Joe Biden wins, then there are a number of things that he's stressed he would be prepared to do and which can considerably relax global nuclear tensions. Number one, he said that he would come back into the deal with Iran if Iran would also come back into compliance. He's offered to extend the START treaty for 5 years without preconditions. There's also a prospect that he could negotiate a freeze with Russia on the introduction of new nuclear warheads. One thing that he would need to do would be to get China involved, now that China is increasing its nuclear weapons in these multilateral talks as well. He is also somebody who has shown an interest in not resuming any nuclear testing, as the Trump administration has been discussing. That would send a very, very bad signal. And he is willing at the same time also to work on preventing the introduction of weapons of mass destruction into space and working on an anti-satellite treaty as well. So there are many things that can be done, and I do honestly believe that it behoves the nuclear powers to stress these things, because the more they're seen as dragging their feet, the more countries will follow Honduras into ratifying the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and this will create an international environment where it will be very difficult for the nuclear powers to justify their continuing retention of these weapons far into the distant future. Thank you very much for listening and for watching me today. Look forward to engaging with you again next week. Bye.